Way back in 1947, as France desperately fought to re-establish its colonial grip on Indochina, Air France attempted to maintain a highly precarious passenger link connecting Paris with Saigon. Covering a distance of more than 11,000 kilometers, this grueling route required at least 7 separate refueling stops scattered across North Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent, dragging the total travel time out over nearly 4 exhaustive days. Because planes at the time lacked cabin pressurization and frequently encountered severe monsoon weather, flight crews routinely carried emergency survival gear explicitly packed for forced landings in the jungle. This challenging air service was kept alive not out of commercial viability, but because imperial interests absolutely dictated its existence. For the subsequent decades, aviation within Vietnam remained nothing more than an afterthought. The market was defined by a lone state-owned carrier, severely restricted domestic flight paths, and a national airspace that was dictated far more by military conflict than commercial opportunity. Regionally, Southeast Asian aviation supremacy belonged entirely to hubs like Bangkok, Singapore, and Kuala Lumpur. Vietnam was merely a place you traveled to by booking a seat on a foreign airline. The modern explosion and the economic paradox. An extraordinary shift occurred between roughly 2011 and 2025, during which the number of operational airlines in Vietnam expanded dramatically from 2 to 6. A single private player, Vietjet Air, single-handedly drove this expansion by placing massive orders for 300 aircraft from Airbus alone. Today, the scale of Vietnam's domestic aviation sector directly rivals that of Thailand. By 2025, airports across Vietnam processed a historic 83.5 million passengers, marking an impressive 10.7% year-on-year growth, and managing a network of 113 international flight paths stretching into Oceania, Europe, and Northeast Asia. Yet, analyzing this data reveals a picture that appears deeply contradictory. The per capita GDP of Vietnam hovers around a modest $4,300, and its national airports are consistently forced to run well beyond their original design capacities. Furthermore, the country's third-largest carrier came perilously close to total collapse after its prominent founder was handed a prison sentence for fraud. Despite these intense headwinds, Boeing forecasts that Vietnam will remain the single fastest-growing aviation market in Southeast Asia through the year 2030. Concurrently, IATA positions the nation 5th on its global leaderboard for projected passenger growth. Meanwhile, seasoned international operators like AirAsia have spent 2 full decades trying and consistently failing to secure a permanent foothold in the country. How did a nation that relied on a lone state airline and possessed a deteriorating infrastructure footprint just 15 years ago quietly cultivate the most vibrant aviation sector in Southeast Asia? The imperative of geography, a natural corridor. To fully grasp why Vietnam's massive aviation surge was practically bound to happen, one must look closely at the country's unique physical dimensions. Vietnam features an elongated geographic profile that extends roughly 1,650 kilometers from its northern border to its southern tip, yet shrinks to a mere 50 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The country's 2 primary economic powerhouses, Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh City in the south, are separated by a distance of about 1,000 kilometers. This geography forces human and commercial transit through a highly restricted corridor. Throughout most of Vietnam's modern era, traveling between these twin urban hubs required surviving a punishing 30-hour rail journey aboard the Reunification Express, or braving an even more protracted bus trip across treacherous, winding mountain highways. The national road and rail systems, much of which were originally laid down during French colonial rule and subsequently battered by decades of intense warfare, were fundamentally incapable of keeping pace with a rapidly urbanizing society. This dynamic stands in stark contrast to Thailand, where Bangkok acts as a highly centralized hub and domestic air routes merely complement a vast, well-integrated highway network. Vietnam's demographic landscape is distinctly split into two distant economic poles, with vital secondary destinations like Da Nang, Nha Trang, and Phu Quoc scattered directly along that constrained coastal strip. Moving people and goods via ground transportation between these points was not simply sluggish, it was highly inefficient from an economic standpoint. Consequently, the air route connecting Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City transformed into one of the most heavily trafficked domestic flight corridors on the planet. According to data from OAG, this specific route ranked as the world's fourth busiest domestic flight corridor in 2025, offering nearly 11 million seats to travelers. Local airlines found themselves competing less with rival carriers and more with trains, long-distance buses, and motorcycles, and the airlines won that battle decisively. Because the physical landscape was unyielding, Vietnam could not establish a high-speed rail network over a short time frame, and expanding highways across the nation's mountainous central spine proved financially prohibitive. Air travel quickly stopped being a luxury for the wealthy. It became the only practical mass transit solution capable of supporting a rapidly modernizing economy. The rise of budget travel and the corporate fleet race. The entire aviation landscape shifted radically in 2011. Vietjet Air, which had been set up in 2007 by entrepreneur Nguyen Thi Phuong Thao as the nation's pioneer private carrier, took to the skies with its maiden commercial flight from Ho Chi Minh City to Hanoi. The timing of this launch was incredibly precise. Vietnam's middle class was entering a phase of exponential expansion, with more than 40% of the population concentrated in the 25 to 59 age bracket, the exact demographic group with the highest propensity to travel for employment or family obligations. Vietjet brought an entirely unprecedented concept to the local market: genuinely low-cost air travel. Ticket promotions slashed fares down to just a few dollars. Journeys that had previously required a typical worker to sacrifice an entire month's salary were suddenly priced low enough to compete directly with basic bus fares. This price drop had an instant society-wide impact, turning millions of Vietnamese citizens into first-time airline passengers. The operational blueprint for Vietjet relied on uncompromising efficiency, featuring maximized cabin seating densities, ultra-fast aircraft turnaround times at gates, and highly aggressive marketing campaigns that captured massive public attention. Even when these publicity tactics sparked public controversy, the promotional strategy achieved its goals. By 2017, Vietjet successfully executed its initial public offering, officially elevating Nguyen Thi Phuong Thao to the status of Southeast Asia's first self-made female billionaire. The growth metrics that emerged in the wake of this milestone were breathtaking. Vietjet ordered 200 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft in deals signed during historic diplomatic visits by US Presidents Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Then, at the 2025 Paris Air Show, Vietjet signed a commitment for 100 additional Airbus A321neo jets, alongside 50 purchase options, an agreement that was firmed up as the event's largest definitive order in October 2025. On top of that, the airline secured orders for a total of 40 Airbus A330-900 neo wide-body aircraft to expand its capacity, bringing Vietjet's active fleet size up to 134 aircraft. However, Vietjet was not expanding in total isolation. The state-owned flag carrier, Vietnam Airlines, countered this private threat by executing its own comprehensive fleet modernization strategy. The national airline currently commands an active fleet of 102 aircraft, a lineup that includes versatile Airbus narrow-body models, advanced A350-900s, 17 state-of-the-art Boeing 787 Dreamliners, and 6 ATR-72 regional turboprops. In 2024, Vietnam Airlines achieved a historic milestone by reporting its highest net profit ever, pulling in 8 trillion Vietnamese dong, which is approximately $310 million on total revenues of $4.4 billion. This financial triumph decisively broke a painful streak of 4 consecutive years of steep fiscal losses. Between these two dominant market forces, several other operators fought to carve out space. Bamboo Airways took flight in 2019, followed by Via Travel Airlines and then Pacific Airlines, which operates under the corporate umbrella of Vietnam Airlines. Concurrently, Vasco continued managing specialized regional connections, and Sun Fu Airways initiated commercial operation in 2025, adding yet another competitor to the local skies, while placing substantial orders for up to 40 Boeing 787s. The structural duopoly and the fortified moat. While the existence of 7 distinct airlines might superficially suggest a wide-open, highly competitive free market, the ground reality reflects a tightly controlled, state-balanced duopoly. The trajectories of those who attempted to disrupt this status quo serve as a stark warning. Consider the dramatic rise and fall of Bamboo Airways. The carrier launched with immense corporate bravado, publicizing an ambitious roadmap to operate 100 aircraft by 2028, including long-range Boeing 787 widebodies designed to anchor high-profile intercontinental routes. However, the entire enterprise derailed in March 2022 when its high-profile founder, Trinh Van Quiet, was taken into custody for orchestrated stock market manipulation and the fraudulent appropriation of corporate assets. Following his eventual conviction and prison sentence, the airline suffered a catastrophic internal collapse. To survive, the crippled carrier was forced to return 19 leased planes to their owners, completely wiping out its entire wide-body fleet, while simultaneously dismissing its foreign pilot roster, slashing 60% of its total payroll and absorbing cumulative losses that surged past 2.3 trillion Vietnamese dong. By the closing months of 2025, Bamboo Airways had been reduced to running just 7 remaining aircraft across 12 modest domestic routes. Securing a foothold from the outside has proven just as grueling for international corporate giants. AirAsia, the largest low-cost airline group in Southeast Asia, spent 2 decades mounting multiple attempts to launch a viable joint venture on Vietnamese soil. The airline tried partnering with Pacific Airlines in 2005, Vinashin in 2007, Vietjet itself in 2010, and Haiao Aviation via a venture unveiled in 2017 that was ultimately discarded in 2019. Every single one of these initiatives collapsed before gaining traction. The primary obstacle is regulatory. Vietnamese aviation law strictly limits foreign equity ownership in domestic air transport enterprises to a maximum cap of 30%, building an incredibly tough barrier against international intrusion. Tony Fernandez, the high-profile CEO of AirAsia, has frequently voiced his intense professional frustration regarding these roadblocks. This defensive duopoly is no accident of history. It is a permanent feature written into the laws of the country. The infrastructure strain, developing backwards. This brings us to the profound twist in the story and the true importance of Vietnam's aviation phenomenon. The real narrative here isn't found in Vietjet's massive order books or the record-breaking financial recovery of Vietnam Airlines. Instead, it lies in the friction generated when consumer demand completely outpaces the physical infrastructure built to hold it, a structural mismatch that is quietly shifting the competitive balance of power across Southeast Asia. Vietnam manages a network of 22 airports that possess a collective, officially rated design capacity of roughly 96 million passengers per year. In 2025, these facilities were flooded with 83.5 million travelers, and forecasting models estimate that total will climb to 95 million over the course of 2026. The entire network is running directly up against, and in several critical locations, bursting through, its absolute physical thresholds. Tan Son Nhat International Airport in Ho Chi Minh City stands as the most acute flashpoint for this crisis. During a single 5-day National Liberation holiday window, this single facility was forced to process roughly 710,000 passengers. The existing terminal space was simply never engineered to handle that density of human traffic. As a result, flight delays ripple across the country, tarmac congestion compounds by the hour, and simple gate availability has turned into a high-stakes operational bottleneck. This intense operational pressure explains the critical importance of the $5.45 billion Longtan International Airport mega project. Located in Dong Nai Province and on track to open its first gates in mid-2026, Longtan stands as the most massive aviation infrastructure investment ever undertaken in the history of Vietnam. The long-term master plan designs this facility to comfortably process 100 million passengers annually, a milestone that will effectively double the entire airport capacity of southern Vietnam overnight. This mega hub anchors a wider national master plan that aims to deploy roughly $19 billion to build or upgrade 33 distinct airports by the year 2030. This reveals the core anomaly of the Vietnamese market. It is developing completely backwards compared to traditional aviation playbooks. Peer hubs in the region, whether we look at Bangkok Suvarnabhumi, Singapore Changi, or Kuala Lumpur International Airport, were systematically constructed infrastructure first. Vietnam flipped that sequence on its head. The tidal wave of consumer demand arrived long before the actual terminals were built to receive it. Massive aircraft orders were signed and finalized before there were even physical runways available to park the planes. Yet, despite this constant structural friction, the entire ecosystem continues to expand. The global engine crisis and regional defiance. This aggressive expansion is currently colliding with a global mechanical crisis that threatens to place a hard ceiling on Vietnam's upward trajectory. A widespread safety recall targeting Pratt & Whitney PW1000G engines, sparked by a critical manufacturing flaw found in powder metal turbine parts, has forced the grounding of numerous commercial jetliners across Vietnam. The operational fallout from this recall has been incredibly punishing. Because specialized jet repair centers across the globe became completely overwhelmed by the influx of affected engines, standard maintenance and safety inspection turnaround times ballooned from a routine 60 days to an agonizing 300+ days. In response, Vietnam Airlines has been trapped into wet leasing replacement planes at astronomical market rates just to maintain its schedules. Dinh Viet Thanh, the Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority of Vietnam, issued a stark public warning detailing a severe deficit of active aircraft that is heavily impacting transport capacity across both domestic trunk routes and international networks. Analysts do not anticipate a comprehensive resolution to this supply chain bottleneck until late 2026 or early 2027 at the absolute earliest. As a direct consequence of this sudden drop in available airline seats, domestic ticket prices experienced a sharp spike of 15% to 20% during the opening months of 2024. The exact working-class travelers for whom budget airlines had originally opened up the skies were suddenly locked out of the market by soaring prices during high-demand holiday corridors. Yet, look at the counterintuitive reality of the situation. Even with large portions of the national fleet sitting idle on the tarmac due to engine issues, Vietnam's airports still managed to clock all-time high traffic figures over the course of 2025. International passenger volume climbed to 46.6 million travelers, a robust 12% year-on-year increase that easily eclipses the pre-pandemic high watermark of 38 million set back in 2019. Simultaneously, international air freight volumes experienced a major 22.6% surge, topping out at 1.3 million tons. The underlying economic hunger for travel in this market is simply expanding faster than a global mechanical crisis can work to suppress it. Redefining the skies of Southeast Asia. The vast majority of neighboring Southeast Asian airlines are fundamentally incapable of replicating the aviation ecosystem Vietnam has forged. The underlying structural drivers are completely unique to the country. First, the physical geography creates an inescapable competitive moat. No other nation in the immediate region features such an elongated, corridor-like shape, which, naturally, creates a captive domestic market completely devoid of any competitive, high-speed ground transit alternatives. While Thailand's domestic aviation sector leans heavily on vacationers traveling to isolated islands and coastal resort towns, Vietnam's internal flight demand is structurally economic, sustained by non-negotiable business travel and crucial labor migration flowing between two separated, massive megacities. Second, the country's demographic profile offers an immense structural edge. A national population closing in on 100 million people, with more than 40% of those citizens situated squarely within their peak earning and traveling years, creates a powerful engine of organic demand. This is a scale of domestic consumption that smaller regional markets like Cambodia, Laos, or even Malaysia simply cannot replicate on a per capita basis. Third, the government's protective regulatory framework provides a highly resilient shield. The strict 30% cap on foreign corporate ownership has successfully fended off incursions from aggressive regional aviation conglomerates that would otherwise move in to fragment the local market. The 2 decades of failed entry attempts endured by AirAsia stand as a testament to just how formidable this regulatory barrier remains. Every single airline operating across Southeast Asia must now recalibrate its long-term strategy to account for the reality of what Vietnam is proving on the global stage. Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi, which has long enjoyed undisputed dominance over regional flight connectivity, now faces a powerful new challenger vying directly for lucrative international transit traffic. Vietnamese operators are now actively running 113 international routes, and Vietjet's massive commitments for wide-body Airbus A330neo aircraft signal unambiguous corporate ambitions that extend far beyond the immediate borders of Southeast Asia. These new aircraft are explicitly aimed at capturing medium-haul routes into Australia, India, Central Asia, and eventually deep into Europe. The historical consensus that Vietnam would permanently remain a minor spoke feeding into other nations' primary hub networks is disintegrating. Vietnamese carriers have successfully captured an impressive 40% to 45% of all international passenger traffic entering and leaving their home soil, with Vietjet alone commanding roughly 24% of that entire international market share. These airlines are no longer content to merely ferry passengers into foreign aviation hubs. They are actively building out their own. What we are witnessing in Vietnam's aviation landscape is a complete inversion of historical norms. This is not a flight network mapped out and imposed by external foreign entities, but an empire manufactured entirely from within. It is an ecosystem sustained not by international airlines routing traffic through overseas mega airports, but one powered by ambitious domestic carriers ordering hundreds of new jets to serve a population that discovered flying was vastly superior to the train and chose never to look back. When Long Tan International Airport officially opens its terminals in 2026, it will solidify an aviation powerhouse that practically did not exist 15 short years ago. The core question going forward is no longer whether Vietnam's airlines can manage to sustain this breathless pace of growth,